Well, good evening, folks. If I can call this meeting to order. We actually have not a bad agenda tonight. We only have 2 meetings that we're going to be going through. We have our committee of the whole meeting that we're going to start off with, and that will be followed by our regular meeting of council. So with that, I will introduce Councillor Barbara Butters to say the prayer, followed by Mr. Joel Longfellow to give us his lead on the national anthem. Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Eternal God, in whom the whole family of earth is one, breathe your spirit into our hearts that we may establish a global community of trust and fellowship, justice and peace. Illuminate the darkness of our minds that we may see your light, think your thoughts, and serve your glory by advancing the greater good of all people. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. Car ton bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée de plus brillant exploit. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, Joel. As always, well done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as always, my pleasure.
Madam Clerk, are there any addendum items this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, 4 delegation requests were received after the deadline for registration, and I would like to bring those to Council's attention this evening. Mr. Roy Timms is here concerning item 1. Michael Reels is here concerning item 7. Jane Nye is in attendance for item 12. And then Pam Crichton for item 13, and leave of council would be required should a member of council wish these individuals to speak.
Thank you, Ashley. Members of council, if I can have a motion to confirm the agenda, please. Councillor Desmarais and Councillor Danch. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening? With none, I'll move on to Councillor Danch. Go ahead.
Item 11.
Thank you. Any further disclosures? Mr. Howe. You're fine? Okay. Sure. Councillor Danch, the nature of the conflict of your interest?
It's an OMB hearing, and I'm involved with that. My name's mentioned on the agenda, so I have a conflict of interest on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Danch, and thank you, Ashley. Members of council, items requiring a separate discussion. Councillor Steele.
Items number 1, Your Worship, and I'll bring forward item number 11 for the conflict.
Councillor Kenny.
Item 7.
Councillor Butters.
Item number 12, please.
And Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Items 9 and 13, please.
Further items, members? With that, I'll ask for a motion to accept the remainder of the items, please. Councillor Steele, Councillor Kenny, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to, oh, we have no presentations or delegations this evening. Okay. We'll move on to the Regional Council's report. Councillor Barrick, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a record. I've never been presenting this early in 4 years. So it's a pleasure as always. I wanted to give just a high-level update on some of the things that we've been working on to keep this council up to speed on Niagara Regional housing. I know it's a topic of interest for many here. What we've done is starting to review our shared services agreement the region has with regional housing, as they are separate entities, but there is a relationship there. Currently, we are providing shared services with regards to HR, operational support, legal services, payroll, purchasing, et cetera, et cetera. So we are looking to find ways for greater efficiencies. There is some duplication there, and the efficiencies that are found, monies will be reinvested back to the front line and people that need it. So that process is happening now, and I'll keep this council up to speed as that rolls out further. The other thing that we've done as part of our budget process leading through to 2015 is a rationalization of our reserves and our reserve structure at the region. We've got several, so it's important for us to keep track of how many, how much money is in each, why we have it. Reserves provide a level of stability, and one of my favorites is the taxpayer relief reserve. So we have that one in particular to help reduce the impact of future tax levy increases. So that's happening as well. And just to be brief, and it looks like you folks will be on a roll tonight, I did want to highlight for the public that there are bursaries available for Niagara students. The bursary program is designed to support low-income youth to access post-secondary education. The deadline is this Friday. However, the package can be viewed and downloaded on the region's website. And also household hazardous waste depots. I know that there's always an interest in Port Colborne and other communities in Niagara for that. There will be a day, September 20th, at the Vale Health and Wellness Center on 550 Elizabeth Street from 8 to 3, where our residents can drop off their household hazardous waste. And I'm happy to take any questions, as always, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barrick. Members of council, any questions of the regional councillor? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Dave. Seen in the paper a couple times, seeing Mr. Timms is here. We'll talk about his brother. Councillor Timms from St. Catharines is championing a reserve fund for future battles, should we say, against arbitration decisions with regards to Niagara Regional policing costs. Just wondered what your opinion is, maybe Mr. Mayor, I know you sit on the Police Services Board, so what your opinion is on that, what it sounds like through Regional Council. Is it getting any traction, or what's the word from the region as a whole?
Councillor Barrick.
Thanks for that, Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor. It's a great question because it's received a lot of press provincially since the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference in London earlier this month. It seems to be gaining some traction, the idea of building a quote-unquote war chest to be able to go through arbitration in that process. There was a motion brought forward to the region earlier in the year that was designed to start a new reserve fund. The basically Ontario Civilian Police Commission Appeal Reserve Fund is the name, and the intent there is to set aside $200,000 a year to that fund. It hasn't come back to council for ratification on whether or not they would proceed with that. There's a couple of scenarios with it. One of it is, are we bargaining in good faith by having that prepared? And the other side of the coin is it would perhaps allow the police to bargain in good faith with us, knowing that we're ready. So to answer your question, Councillor Elliott, it hasn't been fully fleshed out, and we're receiving additional information. And I know, as you noted, Mayor Badaway also sits on the Police Services Board. He certainly may have a different viewpoint from the Police Services Board than Regional Council, but it is a debate that we look forward to.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to expand a bit on that, from my experience on the board for the past 10 years, there's no question that, and no pun intended, but we've been handcuffed for such a long time with respect to bargaining in good faith, making a strong case with respect to what the region of Niagara can in fact afford, with respect to ensuring that our police officers are well compensated. However, at the same time, what is that affordability level? When we then go into arbitration, which we have been twice now, I believe, in the last 3 collective bargaining sessions, we have found ourselves behind the 8 ball with respect to the decision, so much so that we last time around, again, made a strong case for affordability. which is the double-edged sword here, because at the end of the day, when you start talking about putting taxpayers' money into a reserve to really combat these discussions / decisions, when the arbitrators are in fact making their decision based on affordability to pay, and you're putting $200,000 to $500,000 a year aside, it's really a slap in the face with respect to what you can afford when you can actually put that much money into a reserve, and at the same time cite that we have a tough go with affordability. So we got to be careful on what kind of message we're sending out to both the province and of course the arbitrators. Having said all that, we have been working extremely hard at the provincial level to ensure that the province understands, like they have with just the past decision with the OPP, and trying to ensure that the province makes the proper decisions as they have with the OPP with the local police services throughout the province of Ontario. So we're working on that, and of course it all boils down to one thing, and that's what can Niagara afford to pay its emergency services, including both police as well as fire and EMS. And we've been having that battle for the better part of the last 10 years, and hopefully the province starts listening a bit more eagerly now versus having to do this for the next 10 years. Okay?
Yeah.
Any further comments or questions from members of council? With none, thank you, Councillor Barrett. Members of council, your turn. Councillor's items, new business. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. I received a call from Linda Tambury from the Conservatory of Music just with regards to Thursday nights. Now, every Thursday night's been good, except for the night which I was away and there was a concert in the park. I see Dave because Dave helps out. I mean, the concern was of the loudness of the music and what they're trying to do. Obviously, they go from 3 o'clock on because people work and kids have school, because it's a year-long type program for kids to learn how. They had to shut down that night. The only thing I ask on behalf of the conservatory is if you guys can work together to maybe move the band to the bridge end of the street and kind of keep it away from Market Square. Only because that's the only drawback. Other than that, they haven't had any disruptions in their ability to teach music those nights. So if I could pass that through to staff, and Dave, I know you sit with the car guys, so.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
I mean, it's a great event. I mean, it's been a boon for a lot of businesses, and they just ask that everybody works together.
Great,
Thank you.
Councillor. Further new business, Councillor's items. Councillor Elliott, go ahead.
Just to speak to what Bill brought up, I was away that night too, so the next week I ran right down to the guys who organized it and asked them, hey, what's going on because of the complaints. They had 2 bands show up. Normally they sit up in front of Winchester Arms. They had 2 bands show up. One didn't tell them they were coming. So because they had 2, let's let 2 play. Set them up in the park. Unbeknownst to them, it was loud, and from what I hear, maybe wasn't the best. So when it's loud and not that good, it's I don't know if you want to put it like that, but it was loud. They have acknowledged that will not happen again. They will continue, if they have a band, to put them at the Winchester Arms. I just received a email from Tony Spiteri today where there is a noise bylaw exemption application going in. They were told that because anything louder, they're amplifying music, even on the speakers that they have the radio station playing. So to get around that, they want to have a noise exemption. So they're applying for that. They did acknowledge that, yes, they did disturb the conservatory. It won't happen again. And they'll just take it from there. They're really cognizant of what their neighbors are saying, and they really want to make friends with everybody. The other side of the complaint was she didn't know that the road was going to be closed. You know, sometimes things fall through the gap. I don't think anybody even realized she was upstairs and that she was going to be impacted by it. So they're trying to work with everybody so it won't happen again.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to, I guess, Chris tonight. I had asked for a kind of a report to come back on the dead ash trees that are lining a number of our roads and streets, and sometimes on neighbors' property that affect other neighbors. And I just wondered when that comes back, could we contact Canadian Niagara Power and ask what their plan is for trees that are dead and right in their hydro lines. I wouldn't want to see anybody in the middle of winter be without power, so I think we need to know ahead of time so that there's some comfort level from, that people know what the plan is, if there is a plan, and if there isn't, we can ask them to put one in. So I wonder whether you can include that in that report, and if that report, if you can give me an idea by email when that might come back.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodner. Staff has been working on that report, and actually we've been also working on through two departments, working on the tree removal bylaw and the tree planting bylaw. Those are both being finalized, and we can certainly take CNP into the equation and see what their involvement will be.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Howe?
Through your worship, we have met with CNPI about 6 months ago to try to work out a coordinated effort to make sure that we weren't duplicating and that the people in the city weren't going to be without power as a result of some of the dead trees and the ash. So there is a cooperated effort right now with CNPI.
Thank you. That's fine. Further new business? Councillor Demeray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to whoever on staff can answer this. I have a resident on Wellington Street who received a parking ticket for parking across his own driveway. He had taken his car, parked it across the bottom of his driveway because his granddaughter was practicing skateboarding and he didn't want her shooting out onto the road. And it was there for about 2 hours. It was at 6:36 in the evening. He got a ticket on his car. They went in for supper, came out, and there was a ticket there. He did question, he came into City Hall and questioned the ticket and filed the proper papers to see if he could get action on it. But what I'm really asking for is that we take a look at the bylaw. I really don't think we should be ticketing people who are parking on their own driveways. This wasn't complaint driven. It was just a case of a parking enforcement officer drove by and saw it. It wasn't bothering anyone, anywhere, and I think we should be using some forethought when we issue these kinds of tickets. Just cause it creates more cost for the person to come in and see to getting the ticket taken care of.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Aquilina?
Through Mayor Battery to Councillor Demeray, we did receive a request for an in-person review of that ticket. The gentleman has done that. I need to schedule a meeting with him, and I need to hear the whole story. The bylaw says right now you cannot park in front of a driveway. A parking officer, enforcement officer is not going to know whose driveway that vehicle belongs to. We don't have that information on the fly. So the information that would be forthcoming, that would be actually a good thing to know in the history behind it. And it's a difficult thing to actually ensure that people own vehicles that belong in front of the driveways they own. So that's why the bylaw is just don't park in front and block a driveway. That's what the bylaw says.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Aquilina, I just think it would be probably more cost effective to get out of your car, knock on the door and ask who owns a car, rather than issue the and have to go through a whole process, because now you have to meet with someone. It makes sense to me that we would just ask.
Mr. Aquilina, any comment?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's a good point. I will raise that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Further new business? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Mr. Keem or Mr. Lee. H.H. Knoll just had the new fence put in. The frost fence was taken down, and the new black wrought iron fence was erected just a little while ago. I don't know if that's your department, Harry, or if it's Chris's. I guess my question is, aesthetically, it's more pleasing to see that than that old, the wire one. On the south end of the park, we've got all those armor stone, whatever you want to call it, that line around to keep people off the grass, the parking area, and force them to park on the stones over behind the hospital, Northland Point. Have we had any thoughts to improve the look because of those stones? I mean, I know they're effective at keeping people off the grass and parking, but they look terrible. They really, really do. And I just wondered if we're going to change anything out, berm it, or put up a fence or anything like that to make it look more pleasing.
Mr. Lee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elliott. Actually, staff right now is preparing options to present in a report to council on what to do with that area with the concrete blocks. Either berm, treeing, fencing. there'll be options within that report, at which point you'll get to choose which you prefer with costing.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. That's fine, Councillor. Further into business, members of council, members of staff, any updates? Mr. Aquilina?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, I know council did not lift the report regarding our official plan amendment number 1. I would ask that council defer the actual approval of the bylaw. There was one textual change that we made with regards to our industrial employment lands. We have a policy, and it's on page 240 of your council package. What we've done, we've added some more text to that policy to get more into the specifics as to what types of highway commercial uses we would actually support on employment lands. So that bylaw, I know, is on tonight's agenda. I would ask that council not pass that under your business session of the meeting, and we'll bring that forward for your approval on September the 8th. I just wanted to highlight that and make council aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. Members of council, during the council portion of the meeting, if a member of council can actually raise that and ask for a deferral, if that's your pleasure. Okay? During the council meeting, yes. Members of staff, any further updates? None? You're good? Mr. Howe, you're all right? Okay, let's move on to the adoption of the minutes. First off, members of council, we do have the minutes of the 19th meeting regular of Committee of the Whole. This is dated August 11, 2014. If I can have a motion, please. Councillor Bodnar, and seconded by Councillor Kenny. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to consideration of the items requiring separate discussion. We'll start off with item 1. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Worship. Department of Planning and Development Report number 2014-57, recommendation report, background study, and development charges, bylaw update. The council adopt alternative 1, full development charges, bylaw attached here 2 as appendix D. 2, that staff be directed to prepare the notice of passing as per the Development Charge Act.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Elliott. Questions or comments? Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. Spoke to Dan today with regards just to some questions I had from over the weekend. I printed it off only because it's easier to follow. And thanks to Dan and his department with regards to a number of options that the council can take. I'm still of the opinion that we need to do something. Doing nothing doesn't work. We have to try to spur on as much development as possible. And I think in trying to spur that development on, it can't be a process that goes a long time, because you want immediacy. So you want people to get in, start developing, whether it's building new homes, commercial, industrial, which we already take care of in essence anyways with what we're doing and what the region is doing. But homeowners especially, and specifically you look at a lot of infilling lots. If council remembers, not long ago, the mayor announced that finally the tunnel project from 1972 is finally off the books for the province of Ontario. Not that they were ever going to build a tunnel anyways, but so now if you drive down Humboldt and Wellington and Clark and those Janet, you'll see a swath of vacant lots because you couldn't develop on it. In essence, building a house there isn't going to put a burden on our development. So you want to try to spur those on. So I know last meeting when we spoke about this, both Councillor Butters and I kind of had meeting of the minds with regards to what we had talked to Dan about. I still think we need a moratorium. I still believe 2 years is enough. In speaking with the CAO earlier, we know development charges are put into our reserves, which our reserves are fairly healthy. I mean, a lot more money in them would be better, but I mean, for what we have and how we've managed our projects, they're fairly healthy. And I know in speaking with the CAO, you know, those development charges are brought out. They aren't an actual tax levy, so if you don't collect the development charges, you don't have to put the levy up automatically because you're not collecting them. It's not like you're taking money out of the levy. You're taking money out of the reserves, or money that's going to go in to help build or replenish those reserves. So if the councils of the next 2 years look at it and plan properly, I think you can get through most of this, and hopefully that you can get a lot of these infill lots. You can take, you know, properties like CMT School, which, you know, you could hopefully fill. There are certain other areas of town that are under consideration where the roads and sewer and water and all the services already exist. The developer would come in with smaller type of plans of subdivision where they would put in the roads, the water, the sewer inside of it, but it's not like it's increasing our development right away. That's a question maybe Dan can answer on some of those, but I'm really thinking of that where we can put out there a sense of urgency for these lots to be sold off if people own them. Other things are that if you've got a double lot where you've built on one original lot and it's now been merged, you can now sever it again, or if it has been severed, to sell that piece of vacant property. The whole idea is to spur on development. We've seen that in Ward 3 in the Coronation Drive area where people have got huge lots, they've severed pieces off. But the biggest complaint we get is the cost of development charges, both on our side and the region side. So I still believe that there should be a 2-year moratorium. I would like to hear what other councillors think, but specifically on the residential side of it. I think we've done a good job in our CIP with industrial and commercial, but on the homeowner side of it, or residential, because it could be small duplexes and small apartment buildings, things like that. So I just think a 2-year moratorium, let's try to spur it on, whether it's full shot at 0 or we come to a consensus where it could be a percentage, but to throw the full $9 grand plus out there, I think at this time, I don't think will help us. On average, we're getting 12 single-family homes constructed. I think we've got to see more than that. I don't think we're going to see hundreds of them being built right away, but if you can take 12 to 24 in that first year, it may say a lot for this, and to put more money in our tax coffers, because those houses will pay taxes for as long as they're there, or as long as they're there. So I'd like to hear from other councillors first. Thank you.
Councillor Steele. Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree totally with Councillor Steele on this one. I would like to see a 2-year moratorium as well. When I look at, how slow things have been going, or at least in my opinion it's slow, we do have to do something for sure. And then it has to be advertised out there really aggressively. It isn't just enough to pass it in this room. Then the message has got to get out in a really effective way, that this is a place to build, and you're going to save money if you come to Port Colborne to do that. So I'd like to hear as well as what the others have to say, and I think a 2-year kick at that can would be good, and an aggressive campaign to get the word out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question, I guess that would be through you to Mr. Aquilina, because I agree that, in order to spur on at least a residential development, as Councillor Steele said, I think we're doing a fine job on the industrial end. So I don't think that, personally, I don't think that has to be touched. But for the residential, in this report that we received, it says it's important to note that while council can choose to waive development fees for any period on either residential or non-residential or both types of development for any amount of time they desire, doing so may have implications in terms of making up for any potential losses through other financial means, i.e. increase in the tax levy. And everyone knows the tax levy means all the taxpayers. So what I would like to know through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Aquilina, what exactly will that mean to the taxpayer if we decide to put a 2-year moratorium on residential development? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And there is some on page 9.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, yeah.
Has put down. Mr.
Yeah.
Aquilina.
I saw that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Kenny, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
We do indicate what the levy impact would be if you're going to freeze the development charges based on what the average amount of homes are built. And that right there amounts to $93,000 per year on average. On average. So that would be an increase of 0.76% on the levy to make up that difference in lost development charges revenue.
And what I would recommend, Councillor, is that, and we've done this at the region when we had the same desire, is that instead of just having a moratorium and letting it go and having council or staff assume those costs, that council would, during their budget deliberations, actually add those costs into the budget. In this case, it would be the $93,000, so that therefore you have proper accounting happening, and it just doesn't fall as an unfunded liability. Councillor?
Thank you, Worship. I read that, and I wanted Mr. Eklund to say publicly what that is. So we've read the report, but everybody doesn't have access maybe to reading that report. So I just want to make sure that council understood that when it comes to budget time, I don't know how many of us will be here during that process, but if we're here, that money is going to have to be accounted for in our budget. So it's going to have an impact on the rest of the taxpayers. That's what I want to know. Would that happen? Would that be, because I think I have councillors who are of a different opinion, but I just wanted that information clear to the general public, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks.
Any further comments or questions? I have Councillor Bodnar, then Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to pick up on that and to allude to something Councillor Steele said, and Mr. Aguilera maybe could, Bill, you had said that it goes into a reserve fund. Mr. Aguilera, is that correct, that 93,000 would go into a reserve fund?
Mr. Aguilera.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bodnar, all the development charges that we collect goes into that reserve fund to be allocated when needed.
Right. So it may not be used in that year, right? So it's not like it's one of those, one of those things, well, if we used it, yeah, we'd have to raise taxes, but if we don't, it's in the reserve. It is lost revenue, there's no doubt about it, but it's kind of deferred in a way because, as Councilor Steele was saying, is that if a house gets built, it does pay taxes, so there is a way to recoup it if that's what spurred it on. So there's really no, I don't think, definitive answer to say whether if we do this, we're going to have to turn people away because we can't process them fast enough for delivering, building houses. But there is always the thought that it will make people build quicker. And if the councillors that have been here for a while, we did something like that years ago. Yeah. We gave free marina slips. We did, reduce the number of different charges, and honestly can't exactly remember how that worked, but I think it actually did spur on a little bit of housing. So just comments.
Thank you, Councillor Bodnar. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. I always struggle with the rationale behind development charges. And I can understand in municipalities that are rapidly expanding. I think during the presentation of our development charge review, if you take a look at Guelph, Kitchener, places like that, their levy on the new house is like $20,000, $25,000 municipal side. But the cities are growing so quickly that the infrastructure that supports it, libraries, fire department, police, everything is expanding with them. And you have to pay for that. Growth has to pay for growth. I understand that. But then the flip side of it is you take a look at St. Catharines, with the largest city in Niagara, with 130,000 people. They're the only municipality that doesn't have development charges. And the simple fact is they're built out. They can't get any bigger. They've got infill lots. So the infrastructure that's in place is not impacted by the number of houses that are built. And I would argue the same can be said for Port Colborne. If you take a look at the last 10 years, you take a look at the number of houses that were built in a 10-year period. Has our library expanded? No. Has the fire department gotten any bigger? No. Outdoor leisure activities and indoor leisure activities, well, we just built a new arena, so nobody has to pay for another new arena because basically it's already paid for. So we don't have to ask new houses for that because we've already provided you with one. And it's only based on what is built at the time and in the year. So we could have a year where we get zero development charges because no houses are built. So we don't have to levy anything. There's nothing on the levy because zero houses were built. If one house was built, we're only going to get $9,000, so you might as well just throw that out the window because $9,000 isn't going to go anywhere. So basically, you could only levy on your tax roll against those houses that were built. So if we had 10 houses built, we're short $90,000 in a year. You might want to levy $90,000 the year after to recoup that, what's lost. But in the grand scheme of things, are we going to fall behind? If we get 10 houses built next year and 10 the year after and 10 the year after, you get 30 houses in 3 years, does it really impact the services where development charges are supposed to be used for? And I would argue no. The library's not going to get any bigger. The fire department isn't going to be impacted. Water and wastewater certainly won't be impacted because the infrastructure's in the ground already. Take the 2 years. It will give you a test period to see what happens. If we're successful, great. If we're not and no houses get built, We're no further behind than what we started, but we've got to do something to try to spur development. And I agree with Bill. I mean, 2 years as a period, test period, yeah, that's great. 3 years, maybe even better to see what happens after that. But we've got to do something. I mean, let's step outside the box. Let's follow the lead of St. Catharines, waive them they're just waived completely forever for them. But I'll go with the 2 years, see what happens. You're right. Growth has to pay for growth. On a new subdivision build, I get it. You're going to have a plan of subdivision and you're going to put 50, 60 houses in, maybe 100. That'd be great. You've got to put the infrastructure in place to accommodate that. I would say development charges there because now that many houses in growth may spur development and changes in the infrastructure that we have. So I'd say go for the 2 years at least, if not more, and with nothing on the tax levy. Just out of curiosity, speaking of it, what is in the development charge reserve fund as of today, if anybody's got the answer?
Thank you, Mr. Aquilino.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Elliott, approximately $615,000, just a little bit above.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions or comments? Councillor, are you putting the amendment forward?
Well, I've got a question first.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good comments from councillors. Through you to Dan, just more refresher than anything. Aside from the residential, if we take a 2-year moratorium, on the commercial industrial side, can you just give an oversight today, just to refresh everyone in the room and our friends from the paper and COGECO, how our development charges are working both on the CIP side with those areas and those industrial commercial that sit outside those CIPs? How do our development charges, how would they stand with the new system that's being proposed?
Mr. Aquilino.
Through your worship to Councillor Steele, if you refer to page 11, it kind of gives you a snapshot of each CIP and what the development charge waiver is. When you look at our commercial, for example, the downtown CIP, the Main Street CIP, the East Waterfront CIP are all totally waived from development charges. If you're outside of those CIP project areas, the development charges are payable. Industrial development charges across the municipality, there are 2 CIPs. You have the industrial CIP of the city, as well as the region's CIP, and then there's the brownfield CIP. Our industrial CIP is 100% waiver we granted back to you if you qualify for one of the programs under our industrial CIP. So as long as you're within the project area, which is the urban area boundary of the municipality, you build. If you qualify under the CIP, one of the programs, you have to be a certain type of use plan, and you have to meet one of the criteria. You pay the development charges. We hold on to it. We then inspect. And we give you that money back. That is for all development charges in the industrial CIP.
Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dan. Dan, so in regards to the land outside the urban boundary on the Highway 140, that would fall under the region's Gateway CIP or Gateway Development Charge Program, correct?
Mr. Aquilino.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Steele, that is correct. Our industrial CIP is the urban area boundary. The region's Gateway CIP includes our rural employment lands, and they also include lands within the urban area boundary. You get more of an incentive if you're within the region's, if you're within the urban area boundary. It's a special Gateway initiative, an area that they have identified. But you do also qualify for lands outside of the urban area boundary if you score on the point system that the region has set in place.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor.
Yep, no, that's fine. I just, again, more for refresher for everyone, because that was a bit of confusion the last meeting with what some of us did understand, so.
Thank you, Councillor. Further questions or comments? Mr. Aquilino, one question. You said on page 9 that we're spending, or we're taking in about $92,000 a year for development charges. How much per year are we actually expending to some of the services that are growth related?
Mr. Mayor, I can't sit here and give you an actual answer to that question. I have to do some research and number crunch with engineering, with fire, library, all of the services that we provide that are within that development charge to give you an actual number of those costs. I can't give you that answer, and I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Heil, any idea? You're giving me that look like the answer is no.
The answer is no, Your Worship.
Okay, further questions, members of council? Councillor Botter?
So I take it one of the councils is going to bring forward
An amendment.
an amendment, right? Can we actually, will the amendment be clear enough tonight to do that, or does Dan have to rejig the wording and everything through to Mr. Egley?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council does not follow the recommendation that is before you this evening, we will then make whatever the change is, we will then bring forward that bylaw for the next special council meeting on September the 8th. So we need to know tonight what council's pleasure is, and then we will tailor the bylaw to bring forward on September the 8th.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll wait and hear what the.
Councilor Steele?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dan. I will be bringing forward an amendment to this, but with regards to that, Dan, as far as, because I spoke earlier about infilling, I think that's very important. Also about new subdivisions. I think that you've got certain pockets of town that you can add a subdivision without a lot of burden to anyone. You may have a little bit extra plowing of a couple streets in the wintertime, but the developer puts in the road, puts in the water, puts in the curbs, the sidewalks, if that's what's going in, puts in all the sewer, the storm sewer, and the water. So that's not off the tax. So the burden to the taxpayer is zero. However, after that, you've got some maintenance as years go on, but again, if those houses are built, that should pay for that maintenance. Can you see that within an amendment coming forward that we can put a limitation on size of new subdivisions? I mean, I think that the 2-year time period may not pick up anybody because that's a pretty quick turnaround, 2 year for a new subdivision, but do you have an opinion on that and what kind of size you're looking at?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Steele, if council wants to not have this apply to subdivision lands, greenfield lands as they're called, then we can actually map out lands that are considered to be infilling. It's part of the built boundary, and we have that mapping in place. So if council has no appetite to actually waive development charges for new subdivisions that are going to be planned within the next 2 years, there's only one that particularly might come to mind that you might see that development, but the majority of the developments that we may see, maybe the 1 lot here, 2 lots there, are the infilling type lots that we see right now. So I'm not sure if council wants to actually have those infilling only, because if they do, then it's just a matter of having the mapping in place that would eliminate the greenfield lands that you would have a plan to subdivision on and developed. But within the 2-year time frame, that'd be things would have to happen really quick to actually get a development off the ground that's part of a subdivision plan.
Councilor?
Thank you again, Your Worship, and through you to Dan. So in essence, how many plans of subdivision are sitting in the books that really don't have a huge burden on development? That we're not going to be building new parks and new pumping all that type of stuff that comes on with some of these large. I mean, we've got a few that we've talked about around this table that, there's got a lot of stuff have to happen before it goes in because of pumping stations and, because where it's located in the sewer plant, it's going uphill kind of thing. But are there a number, I'm looking at off of Elm Street and Barrack Road, there's a large area that's being talked about, whether that can be done in 2 years. You've got the expansion of Westwood Estates, you've got the expansion of off Barrack Road,
Northland.
well, yeah, the Northland Point, the old Northland Point area, but Ray Canna's subdivision. Meadow Heights, sorry, yeah. Meadow Heights, those are expansions. Are some of those almost ready to go that, are they too large to maybe tie into this? Or are, some of them are already phased, so if they go to the next phase and if it's ready to go within 2 years, those phases may be 10, 20 houses. To me, that isn't a burden, and I think most of those aren't gonna put expansions on parks and things like that. Are some of those pretty close to being shovel-ready?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Steele, there's really only 2 subdivisions right now that on the books that can get built tomorrow. You mentioned Meadow Heights, that is the one, and the other one is our CMT lots. Those other lands that you had mentioned about, they're still draft plan approved. Council has not given final plan approval, and there's a couple other draft plans that are out there that I can't see that happening anytime soon, certainly not in the 2-year horizon that council is contemplating. So those two developments are the only ones that I would see actually getting built within the 2 years, except those infill lots that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. So through you to Dan. So Dan, I mean, I look at CMT more as an infill area. It's not I mean, you're not gonna put a brand new park in for the remaining lots. And we've got Sunset Park, which is huge, and it's used by that area fairly well. So I don't see a problem with that one. I'm just thinking of, like a Westwood Estate. I mean, that's been bouncing around for a while now because of Wayne Fleet and a few other things. If his phase one of that next, or if his first phase of phase two, if I can call it that, if doing something like this spurs that on so that he gets it started to develop before the 2 years, again, that phase, is it going to be, do you think it's going to be a burden on the development charges side of it, or is that something good to look at where he's not going to expand the rest of it and put in the 100 or so houses? I can't remember the total number in there, but if he looks at developing the quarry side first, which I believe is what may be happening, I think, by memory here, can this spur that on? Is Lester Schultz Limited far enough along that they can jump in and let's get this going? Would something like this help spur something like that on in that subdivision particularly?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Steele, absolutely. We are about to actually have a report to council for a final plan approval. We've actually have the subdivision agreement drafted up, or in the very final stages. I anticipate having that report to council within the next month or two. So that may be an extra push, and I know Lester Schultz Limited is very anxious to get things going. So that may be an extra push, extra incentive to actually get the project off the ground. And we know that the development that Lester Schultz Limited builds is a good quality development, and once they want to build, they don't fool around, they build.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I've always stood here and said that, we can have all the plans of subdivision we want on our books. We've had past planners say, oh, you've got lots, don't worry about it. You could have 100 on the books, but if it's not where people want to live, they'll sit there for years and years and years. But you do have certain developments, Meadow Heights being one which is almost full, their first phase. So if we can spur on them to start phase two, let's move it. You've got Westwood Estates, which is now completely full. They're ready to go, and as Dan says, a little quicker than I ever thought, to get going on their second portion of Westwood Estates. So they want to start opening up those phases. I mean, if this can do that, and all of a sudden you do have people that want to buy there, they want to build there, I think this is something we've got to do. And I don't think 2 years is going to affect the taxpayer at all. I think if councils of the day can do good planning, I think David made a good point. Year one, it may be zero. Year two, you may have to do something, but I don't think you will. I just think if you can spur on development, you can get it in people's heads out there that there is development before Colborne, that as time goes on, more people can come here. And if it's successful, then after the 2 years, you may put 50% or 25% development charge fee on it and build your way up if you do see that kind of development go on. But I do feel that we should take the 2 years. Your Worship, I think we should include the infill lots, and I think we should include these subdivisions that are basically ready to go as part of that program. So I'll put that forward, that option 3 be brought back to us with regards to residential development. And through Your Worship, can Dan, you and your staff, maybe tighten the wording up for the subdivision side of it?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Steele, yes, we can easily do that. That is not a problem. And when we can bring that bylaw to council, we can actually identify the areas of land that this bylaw would pertain to. Infill, as well as the draft plans that are soon to be completed, or soon to start. Let me say that.
Okay.
Okay, so if I can be clear, you're looking at waiving development charges, not only for industrial that we already have and for commercial, especially within the CIP areas, but also to include residential. Are you including multi-resident to that as well?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so multi-res and residential?
And residential.
So essentially, for a 2-year moratorium, besides the CIPs that we've established, both regionally, vis-a-vis the gateway, as well as municipally here, to include all sectors.
Correct, Your Worship. I think what they have in this report with regards to the commercial industrial takes care of itself. And then I'm just talking about changing the residential side of it.
And multi-res.
And the multi-res, yeah. Residential being all residential.
Okay.
Okay?
Members of council, do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Elliott. Questions or comments to the amendment? I had Councillor Butters and Councillor Bodnar. Councillor Butters?
Yeah, I just wanted to just bring council's attention to pages 10 and 11 of the report where it tells us about the housing starts and the increase above average and what time it takes to recoup, which, you know, if you get 15 to 20 houses more than the average, you know, your payback time is, you know, 5.56 years or 4.17 years. If you get 42 houses over that average, you break even. So when you have these big potential developments sitting there, you know, ready to go, it is not outside of the realm of possibility. And I think that this makes it very attractive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bodnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm suffering from a tickle in my throat, so I may get this out or may not. Just for the for the record, are there development charges in Ward 4?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Bonner, yes, development charges are citywide. So we have a breakdown of if it's rural versus urban. If it's rural, it's a lesser charge. There's no wastewater or water.
Right.
So right now for the single family home, for example, you're looking at proposed to be 8,500. In the rural area, it's 5,000. It's quite a drop. And actually in the rural area, you're getting, well, if council would have passed the bylaw, you're getting more of a break out in the rural area as opposed to the urban area.
Councillor?
And you say if council would have passed the bylaw, is that going to change? Well, of course, with the decrease, but it won't change what's charged in the rural area?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's a great point. Council might want to look into that because Councillor Steele is only talking about within the urban area, infill and plans of subdivision. Rural lots, you could have rural infill out in the rural area, but it's more difficult to actually categorize that being urban or being infill when you have a vast landscape of open space.
Sure.
So good point.
And
Thank you.
do we have
Councilor
a breakdown with the houses built? How many were built in the rural area versus the urban area?
Mr.
Through
Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, we have that. We can easily find that out. We just gave you the average. But I can say that within the last few years, we see more rural development
Right.
than we do urban.
Councillor?
So my question is, how does that work in the whole grand scheme of things? You know, if more houses are built out there, I'll leave that to Councillor Steele to maybe have a rethink, but I'll wait to see what he has to say.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Councillor Steele because he's
Just
itching here.
point of clarification. I meant the whole city. The only time I talked about more urban side was the urban subdivision. They tend to go quicker in the urban area than they do out in the country. We've had a few. We've got the development off of Cedar Bay Road, which grew over time. But the thing about the rural area putting in a subdivision is, you know, your lots now have to be 2 acres because of septic service and all that. Those tend not to be brought forward as quickly as urban ones. So, no, I'm talking about a moratorium 2 years across the city on residential. So if there's a lot out there, and they can sell it or develop it, put a house on it for 2 years at zero. So, you know, if somebody wants to come forward, you know, again, I don't remember anything coming to this table with regards to any rural subdivisions being planned, but I think what Dan said earlier is that I think that 2 years is not enough time for something like that. But if there's some that are ready to go, and it spurs on 10 houses in a big acreage, you know, if they're ready to go, hey, more power to it. Let's go. But no, I meant the whole city as a whole. So
Thank you. Councillor Elliott? You're good? Members of council, any further comments or questions on the amendment? There is an amendment on the floor moved by Councillor Steele and seconded by Councillor Elliott, that in fact the city expand its waiving of development charges to not only include the CIP areas, particularly to industrial and commercial areas, but to also include residential multi-res across the entire city. Councillor Steele, am I defining that correct? Madam Clerk, do you have that? Good. With no further questions or comments to the amendment, members of council, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried unanimously. Back to the main amendment the main motion as amended. Are there any further questions or comments? Members of staff, pardon me? Go ahead, Councilor.
I just wondered, do we have to defer that back for them to bring us back the new?
What I would suggest you do is we can pass this during committee, and then during the council portion,
Defer.
when the bylaw comes up, we'll have to defer that and send that back to staff so that they can amend the actual bylaw to come back at the September 8th special meeting of council. Okay? Yeah. Staff, any clarification needed?
None whatsoever, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. Everybody else is okay? I see our numbers guy smiling over there. I'm surprised. Don't look behind you, Stephen. With no further questions or comments, members, your pleasure to the motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried unanimously. Thank you. Members of council will now move on to item 7. Councillor Kenny.
Yeah, I thought, no, we, in council.
No, that's for council.
That's for council.
What we'll do is the bylaws are presented to council during the council portion of tonight's agenda, and we'll lift that up, Councillor, during that portion, and of course, it will be deferred for the next meeting. Councillor Kenny, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Department of Engineering and Operations Engineering Division Report number 2014-26, subject 2014-10, citywide design, build lead streetlight retrofit. A, that the Council of the City of Port Colborne award tender 2014-10 citywide road design, build lead streetlight retrofit to CRU Solutions of Ingersoll, Ontario, with a submitted tender of $934,490.60. Option A plus applicable taxes. Further, that a contract bylaw whereby the city enters into a contract agreement with the contractor be prepared. And B, the funding for the tender 2014-10 be financed by debenture, and that the treasurer be authorized to initiate the process. And C, that council award CRU Solutions the annual maintenance contract for a 10-year period beginning 2015 and extending to the end of 2024, all for the estimated sum of $281,712. And that the cost of the maintenance be covered under the existing annual street light maintenance budget. Further, that a contract bylaw whereby the city enters into a contract agreement with the contractor be prepared.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Desmarais. Questions or comments? Councillor Kenny.
Thank you once again, Your Worship. I totally support this report. I think it's important for all of us to realize the immense savings that will happen over this period, and I think it's great that this report's coming forward. I just have one question through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Chris Lee, and that is in regards to the maintenance contract. How, if there is a 10-year warranty, like we read the report, there's a 10-year warranty, and can you tell me just a little bit about the maintenance agreement that is priced at that $281,000?
Mr. Lee.
Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to I think I have Councillor Bodner's. Anyway, excuse me. Probably the quickest way to summarize that is that the dollar value that you see in the report is based on an estimate that staff used with using figures from previous maintenance records. That being said, that cost that you see is estimated to account for storm damage, accident situations, things of those nature. Now, if we're fortunate enough to not have storm damage and not have any accidents, then that number would essentially be zero that year. I know that's wishful thinking, and that probably will never happen, but that's the dynamics of the dollars and cents. We only pay by the hour for every hour that they're on site that we call them out. If we don't call them out, there are no charges.
Councillor.
Thanks very much, Chris. Just so I hope council will support this report. It shows, when you read the report, that an independent study proved that we will be able to reduce our annual electricity consumption by as much as between 163,000 to 197,000, and that was confirmed by CNPI. So I don't know, even with the debenture that it's costing, we're still going to have a savings, and I just hope that council will support this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Further questions or comments, members? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Mr. Lee. Just two quick questions. One that B had already asked. The maintenance cost for the $281,000. I just wondered if that was a fixed cost. As far as the warranty on the lights themselves go, they are warranted for a 10-year period, not to burn out. So basically, if anything happens to the light itself in that 10-year period, it's replaced under warranty. So the only maintenance costs we really have are damages outside of regular use.
Mr. Lee.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elliott. The fixtures and the photo eyes have a 10-year warranty from their manufacturer. If that fixture or that photo eye were to fail, we would simply get a new fixture, replace it, no cost to the municipality. The municipality's cost would only be involved in going up the pole to remove the light and put the new one in place.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Councillor?
Perfect. I guess, and the second question I had was, I'm not disappointed in the price because the payback is 5 to 6 years, which is absolutely amazing. We're getting paid back and paid them off before the warranty ends, which is huge. If it was outside that warranty period, yeah, I might have a little issue with that. The one issue I do have, and it's just a quick question, it says that 10 contractors picked up tenders and only 2 came back. And I just wondered why we only get 2 come back out of the 10 that applied.
Mr. Lee.
Or picked up.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elliott. Actually, we had 10 manufacturers and installers take out documents. So that being said, they weren't all companies that were going to bid. They were companies that were going to supply product to bidders. In the tender process, we had 3 tenders that were actually submitted. One of the tenders that was submitted arrived late. Subsequently, under the rules of tendering, we returned that document unopened to the original submission. And the second tender that was opened, when we got to the opening of the envelope processes, there's actually 3 envelopes that we opened through a process in the tender. In the 3rd envelope, staff recognized discrepancies within the documents, at which point we set that document aside and referred that to our solicitor, and they confirmed our suspicions that the tender had been actually altered, and we had to reject that because of that.
That's fine. Further questions or comments, members? I just wanted to expand a bit on that, Mr. Lee, because Mr. Hanson and I did have a discussion based on a phone call that I received, especially with respect to their opinion on the cost savings that could have been accrued by the city if, in fact, we would have opened that one tender. And I just want to be public about this and transparent. The entire tendering process was handled according to our solicitor's expectations, according to our tendering policy and processes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. And without getting into specifics, can you elaborate a bit more on the one tenderer with respect to the discrepancies?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Actually, when staff opened up the 3rd envelope, which actually contains the form of tender documentation, there were actually pages missing within that form of tender, which would make the tender essentially invalid because there's no flow in the numbers. When that was realized, staff ceased at that point in time and realized there was a discrepancy. So we don't really know, staff doesn't really know what the numbers were. We took that tender document and then submitted that to our solicitor for review. And then it was his recommendation that we rejected.
So in terms of, one, exposing the corporation to the liability or
Correct.
future liability with respect to being taken to task by the other tenderers. 2, you had no knowledge of the actual bid because you never opened that envelope?
We opened the envelope, but those numbers were never looked at. Once we noticed that the documentation, there's a number of pages in the form of tender, 1 through 8, and those numbers didn't jive. There was pages missing, they jumped.
Right.
So we automatically said there's something wrong with this tender, at which point the documents were closed and put back into the envelope, and then we submitted that. documentation to our solicitor.
So which leads me to number 3, with respect to our the recommendation of the solicitor was to put it aside.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, further comments or questions? With none, your pleasure. All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 9. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Department of Community and Corporate Services, Community Services Division, report number 2014-21, subject Community Services Fees and Rates Review Roselawn Author Series. 1, that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne approve the proposed base rate rental of $1,000 plus HST engagement for the Author Series. 2, that the facility rental agreement be prepared for the Author Series for a 2-year term commencing 2014-15 and ending 2015-16 season, at which point a full review of the terms and conditions, including all fees and rates, be undertaken. And number 3, that the city clerk be directed to prepare the appropriate bylaw to reflect the new base rate for the term of this facility agreement for council approval.
Thank you, Councillor Desmarais. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Bodnar. Questions or comments? Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bodnar and I were happy to meet with Harry Hakeem at Roselawn one Sunday morning and sit down and talk about the Author Series and discuss what could be done to make sure that we kept this series here in Port Colborne, because we do understand the value of it. And we came upon this solution, which we thought was quite fair, and Mr. Hakeem took it from there, so possibly we could hear from him.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Hakeem?
Through your worship to members of council. We did meet the following day, and then we undertook, I then went further to speak to Elizabeth about the outcome. And at this point, from what I understand, we're prepared to go forward with a report that was directed by the CAO. So I brought this forward with a memoranda that was attached outlining the results of our meeting. And at this point, we're prepared to, work with the Author Series, pretty much provide them the same services that have been provided in the past. There's a $200 margin increase, which is reflected in the new rate that we can certainly work with for the next 2 seasons, as was discussed with Elizabeth and I brought forward in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Hakeem. Members of council, questions or comments? Councillor Bodnar.
Just like to echo what Angie said, that, I think it's a win-win here, something that we valued in the community and wanted to keep there. And I think from conversations with Bootsy that it will work for her, and we will continue to work on this. I think this is an important thing, and I think we need to, I know Mr. Hakeem has offered to work with the group as they go along and see see how we may help them out. So I think that's a good thing for the community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desmarais, you're all right? Okay, further questions or comments? Bootsy, did you want to speak? Or are you good?
I think we're okay. My only concern was that I just wanted to make sure that we were able to keep the bar open and have a Roselawn staff member, which I thought would be a benefit.
Harry, I'm not sure if you can hear Bootsy, but she's asking with respect to the bar and if they can actually man it themselves. Go ahead.
Through your worship. In response to, there has been some feedback that I've received, and we're prepared to meet with Bootsy just to iron out all the particular details
Good.
without any hesitation. So it's just a matter of getting together and really bringing these details forward that we can certainly identify in the contractual agreement that we're going to carry for a 2-year period,
Great.
which is part of the fee.
Thanks, Harry. Further questions or comments, members? With none, your pleasure to the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 11. Councillor Steele.
Thank your worship. This is for Councillor Danch's conflict. Environment and Land Tribunals, Ontario Municipal Board reapplication for applicants, Niagara Peninsula Housing Corp., 220 Erie Street, and appellants Frank Danch, Erica Rettle. That the correspondence received from the Environment and Land Tribunals, Ontario Municipal Board reapplicants, Niagara Peninsula Housing Corp., 220 Erie Street, and appellants Frank Danch, Erica Rettle be received for information.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Desmarais, questions or comments? Noting the conflict, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 12. Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item deals with Rosemary Armstrong of the Port Colborne Fair Trade Committee regarding Fair Trade Town annual renewal and commitment to fair trade. And the recommendation is that the Port Colborne City Council hereby confirms its support and commitment to fair trade and that the appropriate forms be filed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Bodner, questions or comments? Councillor Butters, the floor is yours.
Only that it's important to renew this commitment. You know, we have a banner that goes up on that bridge, and it's a good thing that Port Colborne renews that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. Further comments? Councillor Elliott.
I talked to Councillor Butters earlier about it, and I had spoken with Rosemary yesterday at church, and she just wanted to make sure that our commitment was going to be reaffirmed. Also that fair trade products are available at all municipally staffed buildings through coffee, tea, and something else. Sugar, yes, sorry. And that it's available in all municipally owned buildings. So if we can reaffirm that, and then Councillor Butters did say that is true, that Ms. Giles looks after that, and it's available everywhere. So it's great to see. First town in Ontario to have it, and we'll just continue to support them.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Thank you, Councillor Butters. Members of council, further questions or comments? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 13. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Letter from Pamela Crichton, invoice received for weed cutting at 95 Victoria Street, Port Colborne, rental property. That the letter received from Pamela Crichton, invoice received for weed cutting at 95 Victoria Street, Port Colborne, rental property, be received for information and that no further action be taken.
Thank you, Councillor. We have a seconder to that, please. Councillor Danch, questions or comments? Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This whole situation concerned me in that we don't seem to have a problem as a city getting a letter to the resident, or to the owner rather, invoicing for a charge, but we did seem to have a problem getting a letter to her, letting her know that there was an issue that needed to be taken care of. And I think that we need to change the way that we do things in that sense. I do understand that usually posting on a door should be enough, but in the case of a renter and an owner, it's not always enough, and I think we should take the extra step. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Further questions or comments? Councillor Elliott and Councillor Danch.
Just real quick, I guess this goes back to Councillor Desmarais' parking ticket. I guess it's the same issue right here. Do we go and knock on the door to find out, or do we, before we issue the ticket for the weed cutting, do we find out if it's owner occupied or if it's a rental property?
Mr. Aquilina.
Through your mayor, your worship to Councillor Elliott, our protocol is to expedite the cutting of the grass. We get a complaint, bylaw enforcement goes out there, looks to see if the grass is higher than the 8 inches that's under the bylaw. We green tag the dwelling, the building, whether it's commercial or residential. That then expedites the process as opposed to finding out who owns the property, sending out a letter in the mail, following up with the property owner, receiving a response back. It's an expedition to get the grass cut. The bylaw that council has, regardless if it's a tenant or if it's an owner of the property, it's all one and the same. It's green tagged. We then tell them you have so many days to cut the grass. If it's not, we go back out and inspect. And then we then authorize our contractor to cut the grass. That's the protocol that council has put in place to expedite the cutting of grass.
Just a quick question to that, Dan. Who gets the bill? The tenant or the owner?
Mr. Mayor, the property owner under the bylaw, and the owner of the property gets that bill, not the tenant.
Okay, thank you. That's fine, Councillor Elliott. I have Councillor Danch, and then I'll go back to Councillor Butters and Desmarais again.
If you read what the owner of the property said, she said that, she wasn't informed properly that they green tagged it. And, she had looked after a vehicle on the property, earlier on in the year. Certainly got that removed when she got the letter, but she didn't receive a letter telling her to cut her grass. Well, I mean, okay, she lives in Welland, it's a rental property. People own these things. I don't know if I can go off topic and say, like, we had a place on Neff Street there. It was just, it was terrible. It was brutal. It was far beyond 8 inches because it was more like 8 feet. And it took forever to get that done. I kind of got to go along with her in this and saying that it could have been handled differently. She should have been directly sent a letter or a phone call or some darn thing. And I don't think we really warrant charging her 300 and some odd bucks to cut her grass. I mean, to me, I think we're just we went about it the wrong way. We should have made that extra call and said, hey, listen, we're going to your place. We're gonna cut your grass. We're gonna charge you for that unless you do something like. And she said in a letter she would have went ahead and got a contractor to come in for certainly a lot less money than what was going on there. So I'm kind of in her favor here. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Danch. Councillor Butters?
Yeah, when I read this letter from this, it made me kind of wonder, like, can you just explain to me the green tags put on the door, and does the person that tags this property, do they speak to the people inside? Do they know that whether it's like a tenant landlord situation or the owner of the house lives there? Is there kind of information that they gather in that process to know that say like the woman is going to actually know that this green tag's on the door if she's a landlord? Seems to me not really a fair thing for her.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Aquilina?
Through your worship to Councillor Butters, once we get a complaint, bylaw enforcement goes there and inspects the property. They do approach the door to warn. If there's no one at the door, that's when it is green tagged. This particular property was green tagged previously. Whether the owner saw that or the tenant saw that, the property then was cut. We never actually had to follow up on that one. So that is the standard procedure. We knock on the door to find out if the owner is there or whoever is there. If no one answers the door, that's when we tag.
And to me, the fact that it was green tagged before and then it was cut, and then it gets green tagged and it's not cut, that would say to me like that the person didn't know that was responsible to go have the grass cut. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they obviously didn't know, because when it was before, they did do the right thing, and when there was like a vehicle or something, they did the right thing and had it removed. So there was a willingness to comply in past situation, I guess if I can put it that way. It would just lead me to believe, well, that person didn't even know that it was tagged to be done again.
So if I may, Council, we do have two issues here. The first issue being the obvious with respect to the letter that's been sent and the request that's made within the correspondence. And the second issue, as Councillor Demeray correctly noted, is the actual policy itself. And I would like to deal with both issues tonight. So dealing with the request, and then second to that, in fairness to staff, is then dealing with the proper policy to be placed, whether it would go to a tenant or the building, or whether it would go to the actual owner like the bill did. Okay? Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to add my 2 cents on this too. As my co-councillor, Councillor Dench, said, we've been having a problem with the property on Neff Street for 2 years. 2. Nothing's been done. They never went in and cut his grass or did anything. They did a little bit of a cleanup in the back. But the whole thing about this was, when she spoke to one of our bylaw enforcement officers, he said that a letter could have been sent. He acknowledged a letter could have been sent to me, but that one was not sent. Like if our own bylaw enforcement officer is saying to the person, we could have sent you that, but we just didn't. Well, that doesn't make sense to me, Your Worship. Sorry. Like, you're right. It's 2 separate issues here. One on how this thing and one related to what was charged. But that, and then he told me I could speak to my supervisor, but my supervisor was away and he couldn't help me. Then he subsequently spoke to the acting director and he told me he couldn't do nothing, that the proper process had been followed. But the proper process had not been followed because she did not get the letter. Thank you.
Mr. Aquilina.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Kenny, I talked to the bylaw enforcement officer. I advised him what our protocol was. We only send letters to people that have vacant property. We do not send letters to all property owners. We green tag. So just wanted to clarify that comment that was made. I've talked to the bylaw enforcement officer and advised them what the actual protocol was.
Thank you. Councillor Bodnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Dan. Dan, you alluded that this was a repeat offender. They were green tagged before for grass cutting.
Go with the owner. Mr. Aquilina?
Through your worship, the Councillor Bonner, yes. On June the 16th, a complaint was made, green tagged, the property was cut.
Councillor?
Okay, well, look, you can't take this one-off thing. If somebody's warned once, and I know we went through this, if the council will remember, when I sat in another chair, that we had repeat offenders. And we wanted to get tough with those repeat offenders because they tend to put it off and off and off. So we instituted a bylaw, I don't know when this one was, but we did something like that to toughen it up. If someone's been warned that they need to cut their grass, geez, you don't usually cut your grass once a summer. You should check it once in a while to see how big it gets. Sorry, I just can't have sympathy for this particular incident. They've been warned once, then they come and cut the grass. Are they waiting to be warned again and then cut the grass? Geez, you should have some responsibility where you do it on a regular basis. So for this particular incident, I don't have any sympathy for this one, whether we change the rules, but through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Agolina, has that green tagging worked in the past? Have we had major problems with doing it that way?
Mr. Aquilina?
Through your worship, the Councillor Bonner, the green tag works tremendously. We've received no other complaints about people not wanting to actually fight the actual charge that council put in place in 2011. We actually changed the bylaw to increase those fees, as what you said, the reasons for that. We added administration costs to that and actual inspection times. That's why that fee increased.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, you know, when you're talking about the issue of delivery of notice, somebody's out of town or doesn't occupy the actual dwelling and where the infraction's taking place, what other method do we have other than tagging the door? If you don't know that the owner lives there, and I'll explain myself, unless we have delivery of notice by a registered letter to the owner's address, you put it in the mail, the owner opens it up and says, hey, you gotta cut your grass, and goes, I'll set it on my table and I'll get to it, and a week later we cut their grass and they get charged the money, and you say, well, I didn't get any notice. The only way that you're gonna know that the owner got notice is if you have them signed for it. So the phone call, well, I see the city of Port Colborne is on my caller ID, and I'm not gonna answer the phone, you still haven't got a hold of me. There's ways around it. If you have a building that is occupied, we don't know who occupies that dwelling. Here's your notice. If your tenants don't tell you that you got a notice to cut your grass, that's not our fault. It's an occupied building. Like Dan said, if it's vacant, we'll track the owner down. But if there's somebody living there, the onus is upon them or the owner to have that communicated to them. We can't be chasing people around. You put something in the mail and I can say, I never got it. You got to cut me a break. You didn't tell me. The phone rang, you left a message. I was away for 5 days. I didn't get it. You cut my grass. You should have given me more time. There's many excuses. The only way that you can give everybody a fair chance by posting a notice on the building because it's occupied and say, here's your notice, we're cutting your grass, we're not chasing you down. It could take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get a hold of somebody that's not living in the building. Do we want to do that? I don't think so. It's occupied, here's your notice, cut the grass or we'll do it for you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desmarais?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are two separate issues. One being the bill itself, and I really can't support zeroing out that bill. I really do feel that as the owner of a rental property, there are responsibilities, and this unfortunately is one of them. But as to our procedures and how we do this green tagging, I have no problem with that. Do the green tagging, put it on the door. But what does it take to come back to the office, look up who owns the property, and make a quick call? That's all. Just a courtesy, nothing more than that. Just a courtesy. And then we save hours like this. It just makes sense to me to do it.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Members? Now, I did have a request from from Pamela, Ms. Creighton, to speak on this issue, members of council. So I will ask members of council if you will allow her to. So I need leave. Councillor Steele. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dan, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Ms. Creighton, if you want to come up, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. As I outlined in my letter and that you've reviewed, I did attempt to sort this out with the bylaws officer and the acting supervisors. Their response was the bill remained in place, leaving me no other choice but to bring it forward to the mayor and council and to use up your time, your money to bring it here. This is, to me, wrong on many levels. I'm going to go through the three primary levels I feel this is wrong. The first one is, as a property owner, I was given no notification of this infraction and was not made aware of it until I received an invoice for work done. Your city website advises an officer will attempt to obtain cooperation and compliance. From my perspective, this was not done. City staff have my address. They sent me an invoice and I received property tax bills at my address. However, no notice was mailed out regarding the issue or even the courtesy of a phone call. If they did not have my phone number, a simple lookup of Canada 411 website would have provided it. I've heard now how you notify people of vacant lots, that you send them a notice, but you don't provide that courtesy to property owners. It took numerous phone calls after I received the invoice to even speak with a bylaws officer, as the contact per the letter did not even return my call prior to starting a vacation. The second bylaw officer I spoke to, in the absence of the one was on contact, the letter indicated that a letter could have been sent, but it wasn't. It was also in the spring, as I outlined, that I did have a bylaw issue. I did follow up on it. I did meet your constraints and your dates, and the vehicle was moved off the property. So it wasn't that you've got somebody that is not compliant, that is not trying to meet your bylaw requirements. I've owned property in the city for a while. I've grown up here, I've lived here. And I just don't feel this has been adequately treated, even based on your website. So I don't understand how this issue was dealt with, why this issue wasn't dealt with in the same manner or with a decent courtesy. My second issue is related to your website, again, advising that the officers will attempt to obtain cooperation and compliance. I must admit this is the first time I heard that there was a tag put on it at a previous date because the tenants dealt with it themselves. And when I received that invoice, I checked with the tenants. They advised me they had called and spoke to the bylaws officer. They advised they were addressing the issue and had removed over half the weeds with a lawnmower already and were continuing to work on the balance. They did not advise me of the tag they had received, as they had been addressing the issue themselves. She did tell me when she was getting ready for work, two men were in the backyard with whippersnippers for approximately 10 minutes and said they had orders to do this work. She requested they leave the property. They had not even notified the tenant they were going into the gated backyard to perform this work, and she's seen strange men in her backyard while she was getting ready for work. So again, I feel this work with the officer cooperation to address the issue. My next issue is the amount of this service. So this is my third primary issue. Having been a baseball player, I always work on 3 strikes, so I have 3 bullets. The amount of the service, $354 for weed cutting of 10 minutes. I have a lawn service I use to cut, trim, and blow and remove clippings. They charge me $50 a week for a property that is much larger. I had already demonstrated from a previous bylaw infraction I had dealt with the issue in a timely fashion. This should have provided assurance that the same would be true in this infraction. So my request remains that there is a consistency in how bylaw infractions should be handled when it comes to property owners being notified and given adequate time to address issues. And in this particular situation, due to the lack of notification, this balance owing and penalty of interest should be withdrawn. I've also brought, in case you're questioning what a lawn service does cost, the amount I pay for a lawn service for a property that's much larger, and I've brought my 2 impact statements, if you'd like these, to see the difference in the size of those properties and that amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Creighton. Mr. Counselor, any questions of the presenter? Counselor Butters.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Are you saying that your tenants had spoken to the bylaw officer in this instance and they were in the process of getting the lawn back into compliance with
That
the
is what they
standards?
told me, and that is also what the bylaws officer I spoke to said. He could see on the notes that they had been in contact and spoken with her.
So if I could, through to our staff, does our file reflect that work was being done on this property before we sent people there to finish it, if I can, or was nothing done? I'm just trying to understand what happened here.
Mr. Aquilina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Butters, I'm not sure if I thought I heard that it was the previous instance that the tenants were contacted. I'd never heard, in talking to bylaw enforcement, that they had conversations with the tenant on the second issue, so I have no notes on the file, so I can't answer that question if that is the case.
Counselor?
So are you saying that it was on this particular issue?
Yes, it was on this particular issue.
As opposed to the first?
As opposed to the first
Which
one?
you didn't
The
know
first
about.
one I knew nothing about. I'd never heard about it till I got here tonight. Of the second one, when I called them and said, I've received this bill, what are you people doing? And they said, we contacted them. They shouldn't have sent that out. And when I spoke to Brandon, he also confirmed, according to the file, that he could see that, yes, they had spoke to, is it Shelley? I'm sorry.
Sherry.
Or Sherry. They had spoke to Sherry, and that there were, and she had spoke to them.
Well, then I think there's some confusion of facts here that need to be further examined.
Thank you, Counselor. Any further questions or comments, members? Counselor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess through this letter, there's dates on when you received the letter and when you contacted the bylaw department. Quick question, when they posted the notice on the door that bylaw had been there, how long did it take between the posting of the notice by the time that the works guys came to cut the grass?
Ms. Creighton?
To be honest, I don't know those exact dates.
Okay, that's fine.
However, I know it was on the file, and Brandon did tell them to me. I just don't quite recall what it was.
Mr. Aquilina?
Mr. Mayor, the dates that we normally give people to cut grass, we post it, and then we give at least 3 to 5 days to cut. If there are times where they get in touch with us, they give us an actual good reason as to why they can't, we hold off. Normally we send a letter out. We don't follow up till after the weekend is over. We go back on the Monday. So we give people at least 3 to 5 days to cut the grass in all instances.
Thank you, Counselor.
So 3 to 5 days between posting and cutting the grass, and the tenants had a conversation with the bylaw officer within that 3 to 5 days? Is that kind of the way things played out?
That's, I believe, how it happened, yes.
So the tenants knew that there was an infraction and didn't do anything about it, and I'm sure...
No, they did do something.
They
They had started cutting it, and now again, they're telling me they had it over half done already, and that had been relayed that they had it over half done and they were continuing to work on it.
Counselor?
That's not reflected in any of the correspondence that we have, so, I mean, I would rather, you know, you get 2 different stories, right? How you can't make a decision when one party's telling us one thing and you don't know what the other side is, and, you know, if you don't mind, I would...
I guess, could I ask a question?
If I may, Ms. Creighton.
Rather just defer it if we can, and, I mean, there's obviously another side of the story. If there's a time lapse of 3 to 5 days where notice is posted and we come back, you would almost think that was sufficient notice. Your tenants would know that bylaw has said either cut your grass when they come back, either the job was done or it wasn't. I really can't see, and I would hope that our guys aren't going out and cutting grass when there's obvious signs that they were trying to rectify the situation. So what your tenants are telling you and what our works department is doing maybe two different things. So I mean, to get to the bottom of it before we say what we're gonna do, I'd like to kind of get comment from our Works Department and find out exactly what happened, and maybe you could talk to your tenants as well.
Thank you,
if
Councillor.
that's
Mr. Aquilina?
satisfactory.
Mr. Mayor, what I can do is actually get all the details for council's consideration, when the date of the tag, the date of how many days were given to cut, the date of the inspection, the date that actually it's our contracting company that cut the grass. So there's a time lapse in there to actually get a hold of the contractor and line that up to cut. So I could get all that information if that is what council wishes to have.
Okay. Further questions or comments to the presenter? With none, Ms. Creighton, thank you. Members of council, further questions or comments on this? We do have a recommendation to receive this only. Councillor Desmarais, you lifted it. Is there a direction you'd like to take, different than what's recommended on the agenda?
I would go along with the recommendation to receive this. I think we need more information.
So you want it, so you're actually deferring it or referring it back to staff for more information? And this will be back at the next meeting?
Yeah, September.
Okay. Do I have a second to that referral? Councillor Elliott. Mr. Aquilina, any further information or clarification you require? You're good?
No, sir.
Okay, so members of council, we do have a referral on the table. All those in favor? Opposed? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. So, Mrs. Creighton, this will be referred to the next meeting, where staff will then come out with some more information. I would request that if you want to be a delegation again, that you let the clerk know. And Mr. Aquilina, if we can get that report out to Ms. Creighton so that she's fully aware of what's going to be presented to council that evening, that would be great. So if we can get her address or your contact information, so that report can be forwarded to you, so nothing's catching you off or by surprise that evening. You can have some advance notice on what's contained within the report, and therefore, if you're going to be a delegation, you can speak on that report. Okay? Mr. Howe, go ahead.
Your Worship, it's in bylaw. There's a concern. May I ask Your Worship if she has any objection to that information being made public in a report?
Is that fine? Any of the information that you have with you in the letter or that you presented this evening?
Or that we have in file. Is
that fine to be part of the report, so it's public? That's fine? Okay. Members of council, before I move on, we do have the second issue that I'd like to deal with tonight as well. I don't want to leave that as a loose end. Would you like to wait till the referred report comes back? Because quite frankly, I don't think it really, although obviously it does have an attachment to this issue, there's still the lingering concern with respect to process and policy. And I think where Councillor Desmarais was going with this, and I don't want to put any words in her mouth, because I'm sure she can deal with it on her own, but does council want to maintain the same process and policy? Or would you like to change that process and policy specifically to notify the owner versus notifying the building and or the tenants that may occupy that building? So I'm just trying to gauge your appetite on dealing with that. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I definitely would like to see the owner notified. The tenant, it's an automatic, they get the green tag, but the owner needs to be notified. They have to be aware of what's going on.
Okay. Members of council, or Councillor Desmarais, did you want to put that out as a motion or a notice of motion possibly at that point in the meeting, that in fact you want to bring that forward as a notice of motion for the next meeting, that policy be changed, that the owner be notified, as well as the green tagging happening, that the owner be notified as they would if they receive an invoice, that they be notified in the same manner?
Okay, I will actually bring it forward as a notice of motion. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Members, we'll now move on. You'll have a chance to talk about that at the next meeting when she brings it forward as a motion. Members of council, we'll now move on to that's it, item 13, that was it. Good, Mrs. Creighton, thank you for your time this evening. With that, members of council, we will move on to notices of motion. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be bringing forward a motion regarding policies and practices around notifying landlords.
Thank you, Councillor Desmarais. Members of council, any further notices of motion? With none, I will ask for a motion. Excuse me for a second. I think you're both asking me the same question here. because you wanted to know if Mr. Timms wanted to speak on option, or on number 1. And I was expecting, because the clerk had, and Mr. Reels, and I think that's what Councillor Crane's going to ask about Mr. Reels for number 7. What I had expected, the clerk had mentioned during the addendums that we had folks that wanted to speak. I was contacted by Mrs. Creighton prior to the meeting that she would want to speak, so I brought that up myself during that report being raised. The other reports were raised. No members of council brought up your desire to have someone speak, which I was quite frankly expecting. That's why I thought they were separated, but no one did. So you can do it during the council portion if you want, with respect to items, those 2 items, if in fact they would want to speak, and then we can go from there. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, motion to adjourn this portion of the meeting. Councillor Steele, Councillor Kenny, questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. We'll now move on to the council portion of this evening's agenda. And with that, Madam Clerk, are there any addendum items?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One item that I would like to note for council is that the bylaw concerning the development charges has been withdrawn due to an amendment during the committee of the whole meeting. It will be presented at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Ashley. Members, if I can have a motion to confirm the agenda, please. Councillor Danch, Councillor Bodnar. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Disclosures of interest. Councillor Danch.
Item 11 is mentioned in that one, the situation.
Thank you, Councillor. Further disclosures? With none, I do have 2 sets of minutes I will read, and if you don't mind, I'll read them in block. The first being the minutes of the 23rd meeting special of council dated August 11th, 2014. And the second are the minutes of the 24th meeting regular of council, same date, August 11th, 2014. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Desmarais, Councillor Elliott. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Items requiring separate discussion. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll bring forward item number 1 and item number 11 for the conflict. Now, just with regards to item 2, since the clerk has said it's been withdrawn, that we don't need to bring that up now to defer it, correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Would you raise item 7 too? I believe somebody wanted to speak on that one.
Yeah, I can bring number 7. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so 1, 7, and 11.
1, 7, and 11.
Thank
yeah.
you, Councillor Steele. Good. Councillor Steele, can you lift item 2 too? Item 2, 2? That would be TWO, TOO. Yeah. Yes, the bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The remainder of the items, members? Mover and seconder, Councillor Danch, Councillor Bodnar. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. We'll now move on to the items requiring a separate discussion. Councillor Steele, item 1.
Thank you, Your Worship. Department of Planning and Development, report number 2014-57, recommendation report, background study, and development charges bylaw update.
Seconder, please. Councillor Desmarais, and that is as amended?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that is as amended? Okay, now, with that, this is being lifted to see if there's a delegation. Go ahead, Councillor Steele.
No, because I want to defer it because of our amendment to back to staff, but since you've asked about a delegation, if Mr. Timms wants to speak on it, I'll put that forward.
Okay, so,
Does he wish to
Mr.
speak?
Timms, did you want to speak on this?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, great. So if I can have a leave of council, please. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Butters, questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Timms, welcome.
Your Worship, members of council, thank you for your patience and hearing us again. I guess at our last presentation, the Niagara Industrial Association talked about a survey of our membership from 2 years ago, and we recently completed that survey again, so I just wanted to briefly report on it to you. We were very successful. As you know, we have about 190 members. We received 81 responses to the survey, so we're very pleased with that. 52 of the replies stated they were anticipating expansion between now and the end of 2016. 91% of said the industrial development charge could affect their plans. 46% said they would delay their plans. 48% said they could cancel they said they would cancel their plans. 73% said they would consider relocating outside of Niagara. 74% said development charges are considered when preparing business plans. 94% felt that the development charge would negatively affect industry in Niagara. So your discussions of earlier tonight were most welcome. I have emailed this to all of you, but later, it was late this afternoon, so you may not have had a chance to review it. And I won't read all of the various comments. There was just one that I thought was worth commenting on, which was the comments from Craig Bolton. He's the owner of Peninsula Plastics in Fort Erie, and he went ahead with an expansion just prior to the region setting up the grant process for development charges. And at the time, Fort Erie had development charges for industry, so he paid an industrial development charge. It was negotiated and reduced, but I think what is of interest to you is that prior to this expansion, he had a 35,000 square foot plant, and he was paying 40,000 in property tax. After it, his taxes went up to 80,000, and so in essence, the town of Fort Erie and the region are receiving every year another $40,000 worth of property tax from Peninsula Plastics, and I guess all we're saying is that there is a payback. I mean, it is good for industry to expand. Not only does it create new jobs, it also creates additional income to the various levels of government. So, the other, I had two other comments, I guess. One was that when you do consider your industrial development charge, we would recommend really that you keep it simple and straightforward. And the bit about in the existing bylaw, I guess if you expand over 5,000 square feet, you don't pay any development charge. If you expand less, you do pay. You could possibly pay a development charge. I guess it would depend on the size of your existing building. So I would just suggest you simplify it. It sends out a clear message to industries, and I guess that's basically it. So thank you for hearing us again, and we look forward to the new bylaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Timms. Members of council, any questions or comments to the presenter? Councillor Elliott.
Just on point of clarification on the industrial charges, we only tax on the first 5,000, right?
Mr. Aquilina.
Through your worship, yes, we do $5,000. Or sorry, 5,000 square feet, $1.29.
So if you build 1 million square feet, you only get taxed on the first 5,000.
Right.
Everything after that is tax-free.
Understood. I think the concern, though, is for the small guy. You know, that's still a fair bit of money. So.
Thank you. Further questions or comments of the presenter? With none, Mr. Timms, thank you. Thank you for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Worship. So then with item 1, if we could defer it as amended back to staff to come forward on the September 8th meeting with the appropriate changes.
So we refer it back to staff?
Or refer it.
Okay. Seconder to that, please. Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. We'll now move on to item 2. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. Department of Planning and Development Report number 2014-58, subject recommendation report, official plan amendment number 1.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder, please. Councillor Bodnar. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. As asked by staff, we could, if we could refer this back to staff for September 8th meeting to come back with the appropriate bylaw.
Just, Did you want the whole report or just the bylaw? Mr. Aquilina, did you want the whole report or just the bylaw?
Mr. Mayor, what we will do is, to simplify things, we'll just have the bylaw before council. And it's really just the terminology of being clear what types of highway commercial uses we would allow. Though right now it's very broad, we just say highway commercial uses, but not getting into the specifics. Conversations with the region following Mr. Halinga's presentation.
Right.
We then put in proper wording that it comforts the region that actually still allows highway commercial uses, but they're more industrial in nature. Contract supply outlets, repair garages, things of an industrial nature, but also are permitted under highway commercial zone.
So with that, and with language being changed, may I suggest we actually get the report and the bylaw back, so that way council's fully aware of what language is being changed? That's
Sure.
fine? Okay, so we're gonna refer this back to staff for the next meeting? Okay, so did I get a mover and seconder? Seconder, please. Councillor Bodnar? All in favor? Opposed? That'll be carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 7. Councillor Steele. B? Go ahead, B. That's yours. We'll give that one to you.
Thank you, Worship. It's just that I overlooked when I pulled the report, we had a delegation here, so it's just asked for leave of council to ask that delegation to speak on item number 7.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Do I have a seconder to that, please? Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Reels, welcome.
Mayor and Council, thank you for hearing me tonight. Michael Reels from 81 Homewood. Just had a couple questions about the financing of this. What is the proposed length of the debenture for this project?
Mr. Howe?
10 years, Your Worship.
Mr. Reels?
You'll have to forgive me for quoting the newspaper, but in the July 3rd import, there was an article regarding this RFP where Alan Benner wrote that $1.2 million was set aside in the budget to pay for this. Now, why, if that is true, why is there a 10-year debenture for this project?
Mr. Howe?
That was incorrect in the newspaper.
Okay.
There's no money set aside for that, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Members of council, any further questions? Mr. Reels, before you leave the podium, any questions of the presenter? With none? Thank you. Appreciate your time tonight. Councillor Butters.
Yeah, this is like the magic of iPad. I get this little bing, and I get this message pop up that ends up kind of being important. And I'd spoken to Dan Aquilina, and if you will allow me, it has to do with Cedar Bay and a campground on a personal property. And I'm just going to read it to you because this is like a pretty serious. It started off with some trailers being moved onto this private property, ended up being 8 over the weekend. People are still living in them. People are still camping on them.
Councillor, if I can just interject for a second. Does that have something to do with this report?
No.
Okay,
This is,
I'll come back to you in a
Okay.
second, okay?
I
Back.
just don't want to lose the opportunity.
Okay, no problem. Members of council, to this report, it has been moved and seconded. Are there any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. We'll now move on to item 11. I'll come back to you in a second, Councillor Butters. Item 11, Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, item 11 for Councillor Danch's conflict. Environment and Land Tribunals, Ontario Municipal Board, reapplicants Niagara Peninsula Housing Corporation, 220 Erie Street, and appellants Frank Danch and Erica Rettel.
Thank you. Seconder, please. Councillor Elliott, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Thank you. Is everybody getting a scratchy throat tonight? It's dry. I think it's dry in here. I know Councillor Bodnar. I think one of the staff members over here I've seen hacking. I know Bob's been hacking, and I've been every time for the last couple of meetings I've been sort of.
That's your problem. You're drinking too much alcohol.
Listen, Steele, Dan, you guys got something to say to each other? Maybe wait till after the meeting. But no, it has been dry. Maybe we should get some humidity in here. Anyways, if we can, and Councillor Butters, I am going to get to you near the end of the meeting. Although there's no real new business on the agenda, we'll make an exception for you. Although the clerk might kick me again. But check with Ashley. Members, I am going to move on to proclamations now. And as always, I'll be looking for a mover and seconder to this proclamation, which is National Feral Cat Day. and I'll be looking at Councilor Butters because this is your baby. It is, whereas October 16, 2014 is National Feral Cat Day, a day dedicated to educating communities about the feral cats and trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, a humane method of care for our own cats. And whereas trap, neuter, vaccinate, return improves the lives of cats, the stresses and behaviors associated with breeding, such as yelling and fudding, stop. And whereas trap, neuter, vaccinate, return is recognized throughout the U.S. and Canada as a humane and responsible way to manage feral cats. Now therefore, I, Mayor Van Sam Badaway, proclaim Thursday, October 16th, 2014 as National Feral Cat Day here in the city of Port Colborne, and encourage all citizens to support trap, neuter, vaccinate, return as a responsible and humane method of dealing with feral cat populations. Mover and seconder, stop that. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Butters. Seconded by Councillor Demaray. Questions or comments to it? Councillor Danch. Councillor Elliott.
Nope.
All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. You know, it's easier for you guys because you guys don't have the camera in your face. Members of council, I do have the minutes of boards, commissions, and committees, and I will do them in block if you don't mind. The first being the minutes of the Port Colborne Public Library Board meeting dated July 18th, 2014, and the minutes of the Port Colborne Transit Advisory Committee meeting of March 26th, 2014, as well as May 28th, 2014. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Steele, Councillor Kenny, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Notices of motion. Councillor Demaray.
Yes, I will be bringing forward a motion next meeting to recommend changes in how we notify rental property owners.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Butters, I'm going to come to you now. I'm going to squeeze this in here before the bylaws to allow you to bring forward.
Well, the magic of this device is quite incredible, actually. Well, I'm sitting here and it goes bing, and then I think, oh, I better look. And apparently, prior to the weekend, a complaint came in on Cedar Bay Road area about a residence that was moving in trailers, like big trailers, into their backyard, and people were staying in them and camping in them. And the number rose to 8 trailers over the weekend. And I get this message from the person who is kind of suffering from the effects of this, and it just says, "Hi Barb, I think I'm going to have to call the newspapers tomorrow and let them know what's happening here. Those people are still there, camped out with no one moving, and it stinks like crap as well. Still camping, still living there. I figured by Monday they would be all gone. They've been there all day with families, and it doesn't look like anyone's moving anywhere. I was going to call the mayor's office as well and let them know what's going on and what can be done about it. Otherwise, I have an ad on hold I'm putting on Kijiji to rent my backyard out for the season up to October for people to camp." I know the complaint is being dealt with, but I think that when there's like odor coming from there, these trailers, like she sent me pictures of them, they're huge. Like I can't even believe they've got a porta potty delivered in the driveway of the residence. Like it is kind of insane that this is going on just down from Bodner's store. So I would really want some assurances from our staff that this is not going to continue. Like I can picture Labor Day weekend. They had a party at this residence where there was like a heavy metal rock band that was performing over the weekend. Like this is just not acceptable in that area whatsoever. So I want to see this being dealt with like swiftly. This could be going into like a public health issue as well, because there's like sewer, gray water, you know what I'm saying? This is not good.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
I am going to ask Councillor Butters that you put a motion on for leave to allow this discussion to happen, because I think it does warrant some discussion. So there is a motion by Councillor Butters, seconded by Councillor Bodner, that that leave be asked for to introduce some discussion on this. All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Now, with that, Councillor Butters, you're asking staff to...
What I'm asking for is, like, I don't know what the time frame was given by our bylaw that is to move these trailers out of there. I don't want them there into, like Labor Day weekend is around the corner. And if they have some intentions of, they've obviously setting up, prior to this weekend, they were there moving in and then partying all weekend. I don't want to see this neighborhood suffer anymore, especially over the holiday weekend. This is like ridiculous.
Mr. Aquilina?
Through your worship, we got the complaint. It is an open file. I'm uncomfortable giving into the specifics of the file, but it is a violation of the zoning bylaw. We need to handle it like we normally handle it, but we can expedite the process to ensure that there is compliance. And I'll reserve any further comments because it's an open file.
Okay, so having said that, I know the provincial laws, again, handcuff us, as I was stating earlier, with some of the provincial activities. We are handcuffed with respect to protocol and process. Is there a manner that council, is there a method or a mechanism that council can actually pursue this evening to accelerate?
Mr. Mayor, there could be direction to accelerate it, where our hands are tied in the sense we need the cooperation for compliance on the other end. So depending on any file where it needs to go, ultimately it may be beyond the municipality's power to control things. We need to go to the next level. So we can expedite things.
How about an injunction?
We can do that, Mr. Mayor. There is the process to go through that. That something that the municipality can't do. It needs to go to the upper court system.
Mr. Heil?
We'll pursue an injunction in the morning, Your Worship.
Thank you. Done. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Aquilina. And thank you, Mr. Heil. Councilor Bodnar.
Just a point of clarification, is this a normal thing that we would bring up, an infraction at the council table when staff are dealing with it? I know, I'm just questioning whether that is what we would entertain on a regular basis. I don't know, I'm just,
Well,
it's first I've
it's not.
heard of
It
that.
doesn't happen often, and well, two things don't happen often. First off, bringing this to a council meeting, and which we've got leave for, which is fine. But the second is to accelerate something that the ward councillor is obviously receiving feedback that there's a problem here, and quite frankly, again, because we're often handcuffed over process with respect to property standards and bylaw enforcement, things like that. By the time we can actually react to a situation like this, obviously, or a lot of times the actual situation's over with. It goes back to the old saying, ask for forgiveness versus ask for permission. And this seems to be one of those cases. They haven't got hold of the mayor's office. And by the way, the mayor's office is only one person, one mayor, not them. But having said that, no one's got in contact with me to my knowledge yet. And with that said, I'm sort of running blind here. I'm going by your comments, Councillor Butters, and I'm sensing some sense of angst here and time sensitivity. So with that said, and if an injunction can be had, then we can pursue that. Now, I would ask council's thoughts on that, because in fairness to council, not every councillor might think that way. So I will ask for council's thoughts on that. But going back to your question, Councillor Bodnar, the simple answer is no, it's not normal. But again, when a councillor does bring something up with some, I guess, sensitivity attached to it, then by all means, I would expect that we would entertain that. So go ahead.
my question really is, we're not not going over the line with anything that, we've obviously mentioned the spot where it is, so I just don't know if we're crossing some line because, all the different rules that were imposed on us for, for trying to find out what's going on once a complaint is filed. I just don't know if we're stepping over the line.
Well, I think there's, and I'm going to go to Mr. Howe in a second, but I think there's three issues here. One is that there is an infraction. It has been recognized by staff. Two, there is a process that we have to go by with respect to that infraction. And three, if council, the resident council, feel that the process is going to take too long, then we do have a mechanism, a method, through an injunction to accelerate that process. Mr. Howe?
I respectfully request that this be adjourned to an in-camera session, Your Worship.
Okay. Do I have a mover and seconder to go into closed session on this issue? Councillor Butters, Councillor Steele, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Sorry, guys. We have to close down for now, and we're going to go into closed session. Okay, we'll now enter back into open session. Members of council, we do have a report or a leave of council to discuss an issue that Councillor Butters brought up, a situation out in Ward 4 that she seems needed, or she brought forward that needed council's attention, as well as to give some direction to members of staff how to deal with it over and above how they're presently dealing with it. So with that, members of council, staff, I'm going to ask Mr. Aquilina to go over exactly how it's being dealt with. And then, of course, with that, either council is satisfied with that, or they want to accelerate the efforts by staff, and a recommendation would then therefore be expected by a member of council. Mr. Aquilina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just like with any sort of violation we receive, property standards by law enforcement works with the neighbor to try to get compliance. I will leave my comments at that. We are trying to get compliance of an issue that a violation has occurred.
Thank you. And you are dealing with it? And you have spoken with the property owners?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, questions or comments to that? Councillor Butters.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I'm going to ask for is that our staff very diligently, aggressively pursue this so that this matter can be hopefully resolved before the next long weekend. My concern revolves around public health and the fact that where sewer and gray water may or may not be going. So these are the concerns that I have, that this needs to be dealt with along with the other issues that happened over the weekend. But that's what I'm asking our staff to do, is very aggressively, diligently pursue this so that hopefully there is compliance by the weekend.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. Mr. Howe, how is staff going to diligently, aggressively deal with this?
Your Worship, I will have a discussion bright and early in the morning, if not later yet tonight, with the director of the department who's responsible for bylaw enforcement. We'll plan an attack, and we'll pursue it if we need to, with the advice of our legal counsel.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Members of council will take that as staff direction. You're fine with that? Okay, so staff, just to be clear, is going to be discussing this with each other tomorrow morning. I'm sure they're going to then approach the property owner, and let's hope it can be resolved. If not, we're going to get some legal counsel and move from there. If staff then brings to my attention that members of council will have to be brought back to the table, I'll react accordingly. Okay? Great. So with that, Madam Clerk, you're up to introduce the bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the following bylaws be read 3 times and finally passed. Bylaw 61228814 being a bylaw to authorize entering into contract agreements with CRU Solutions regarding tender 2014-10 citywide road design bid build, LED street light retrofit and annual maintenance contract. Bylaw 61238914 being a bylaw to authorize the borrowing of the sum of $955,000 upon the issuance of debentures. Bylaw 61249014 being a bylaw to authorize entering into a facility rental agreement with the Canadian Author Series respecting the Roselawn Centre for the Arts. And finally, bylaw 61259114 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 6006-11213 being a bylaw to establish a schedule of rates and fees for the Valley Health and Wellness Center, Roselawn Center, Nickel Beach, and municipal parks and playing fields and marina.
Thank you, Ashley. Members of council, mover and seconder, please. Councillor Bodner, Councillor Steele, questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Madam Clerk, the confirmatory bylaw, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the following bylaw be read 3 times and finally passed. Bylaw 61269214 being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne at its regular meeting of August 25th, 2014.
Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Danch. Councillor Kenny, are there any questions or comments? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That as well would be carried. Members, I'll now be looking for a motion to go into closed session. And that, to A, deal with the minutes of the closed session portion of the August 11th, 2014 regular council meeting. B, to deal with confidential Chief Administrative Officer Health Services Division Report number 2014-02 regarding a contractual agreement pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, subsection 2392B, personnel matters or personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. You pretty well told everybody what it is here, Bob. CEO, health services, contractual. C, confidential community and corporate, no names, no. Confidential Community and Corporate Services Clerks Division Report number 2014-29. The subject members of council is appointments to the Flavors of Advisory Committee, second recruitment process pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001, subsection 2392D, 2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, and excuse me, including municipal or local board employees. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Kenny, Councillor Bodnar. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Have a wonderful week.